Welcome to Energy Vista, a podcast on energy issues, personal and professional trajectories. I'm your host, Leslie Palti-Guzman. In each episode of this podcast, we chat with energy experts from all around the world. They tell us about their passion, inspiration, and aspiration. And one of my favorite parts of this podcast is the focus on their personal trajectories. I always learn a lot and find it very inspiring. It's November 4, 2019, and time for a new Energy Vista episode. Today I'm exchanging with Dagmara Koska. Dagmara is a senior advisor, diplomatic counselor, and team leader on energy and climate policies in the delegation of the European Union to the United States. Her focus is on the transatlantic energy, climate innovation, and regulatory dialogue. And she will tell us all about it in the following conversation. Hi, Dagmar.
Hi, Leslie. Hi. Great to be here with you today.
We're very happy to have you here. And a lot is going on in the European Union regarding energy and climate, but also in the United States. And you're very well positioned to see this from your perspective and on both sides of the Atlantic. So I would like to start with asking you whether the EU energy and climate strategy is still relevant. For a long time, the motto has been secure, competitive, and sustainable energy. And do you think there is a need for an update, or how is that working? And where do you fit Russia, Greta, and the Green Deal in this strategy?
Thanks. It's a great kickoff question, Leslie. Well, first of all, let me say that the EU's energy strategy has been driven in the last 5 years by the so-called European Energy Union. It was an attempt to actually have all the different strands that were important for the energy policy work together under one umbrella. And I think we have been very successful with this. We had 5 years ago put out a action plan about the energy union with different deliverables, and 5 years on, I think we're looking at a very, very successful implemented energy union with all strands of work. In particular, we've been looking at 5 pillars of energy union. The first pillar being energy security. And on the energy security front, the European Union is 5 years on, much more robust, much more resilient, and indeed, we believe also much more competitive thanks to our improved energy security.
Very good. So what about Russia? There has been for a long time a push to diversify energy away from Russia to become more independent. What's your assessment of today of where the policy is?
Yeah, listen, Russia is our biggest importer of energy. We import 40% of our natural gas from Russia. And indeed, the European Union is extremely input dependent. We are not, a country that, a bloc that actually has a lot of natural resources. When it comes to natural gas, we produce some natural gas in the north of Europe and in other parts, like, for example, Romania, but mostly rely on imports. And that's why our strategy has been about diversifying our energy sources, routes, and suppliers. When it comes to Russia, we still, as I said, import a lot of resources, but our reliance on each other is mutual. So as much as we rely on Russia for natural gas in particular, but also on coal and oil, Russia also depends on us when it comes to getting revenues from energy. And as you know, the European Union and Turkey are the biggest recipients of Russia's energy sources and resources, and therefore we believe that with the mutual, interdependence, we actually also have had over the last years and decades a very constructive working relationship.
Yeah, so there has been a lot of noise last week around Nord Stream 2 because Denmark finally granted the permits for the expansion of Nord Stream. Do you think, the opponents of Nord Stream 2 have for a long time argued that it's more a matter of growing political influence and clout of Russia through the energy exports. Do you think that's still a concern for some people at the European Commission and Eastern European countries?
So, when it comes to Nord Stream 2, the position of the European Commission has been very consistent over the last years. When we measure Nord Stream 2 against the principles of the energy union, which we talked about in the very beginning, this project does not fulfill any of those principles. It does not diversify route suppliers or sources of natural gas to Europe. In fact, it brings potentially a negative impact on other supply routes, like the route through Ukraine and potentially also Poland and Belarus. By having, one route less, potentially, it is harmful to European competitiveness, European internal market. So indeed, Nord Stream 2 is a very political issue in Europe, and as you know, EU as such does not have one uniform position when it comes to Nord Stream 2. But the European Commission has been clear that we, in fact, prefer pipelines that unite rather than pipelines that divide.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, we've not been necessarily very supportive, simply given that this has raised so much political attention and tension.
Yeah. So do you think it's going to go ahead, or there's still a threat from US sanctions?
So I think the threat of US sanctions is still there. You have seen also the reactions to the Danish permit last week, in particular coming from Congress, from Senate. Senator Cruz has been outspoken about trying to push forward the bill that actually passed before the first committee earlier this fall. Let's see. I think on Nord Stream we also have to say that when it comes to supplying and routes for supplying Europe, we have a capacity right now of around 700 BCM. EU's use of natural gas right now is around 300 BCM, and if you look into the future, different projections show different future gas demands in Europe, and some project between 300 BCM as of today, so basically constant energy demand. Others project up to 600 BCM. But when you think that we have actually 700 BCM spare capacity, all capacity added up together, right now without Nord Stream 2 700, then you can clearly see that even if you take the most expansive projection about future gas use and gas demand in Europe, you still have a lot of spare capacity. That's, I think, one of the arguments we use.
Yeah, and is it an argument that environmentalists put forward also? Because, if we look in the US, there is an opposition to new pipelines, especially cross-state pipelines. Is it something you've noticed for Nord Stream 2 or not really? And one of the things that is driven that is, one is stranded, like the fear of stranded asset, and we don't need another white elephant. But also, if there is a low utilization of this infrastructure, what's the need for building it, right?
Absolutely. I think the argument of a stranded asset is exactly the logical implication of what I earlier said about our import routes. The second argument is obviously that Europe as such has a lot of very ambitious goals when it comes to 2030 and 2050, and potentially in the future even more ambitious targets for 2030 on energy efficiency, on renewables and research and innovation. And if you look into those targets, and we should, for example, improve our energy efficiency by over 32.5% in the next decade, and have renewables energy covering our 32% of our whole energy mix in the European Union, then indeed you also see that this project you might consider this project as ignoring EU's long-term objectives on renewables and energy efficiency.
Okay. And does the European Union has a view on the impact that Greta has on the youth movement? And we hear some of that in the US, but I'm sure it's much more powerful in Europe.
Yeah, we've been extremely supportive to the youth movement, in particular climate strikes. We've been, in fact, prioritizing the topic of youth involvement in climate action over the last years. I'm counselor for both energy and climate, and one of my strands of work under the climate agenda is to organize regular outreach activities and climate diplomacy activities here in the United States. Throughout this year, we've been devoting a lot of attention to youth climate and youth movement. And so our topic of the discussions this year in Washington, D.C. has been, how is the youth shaping our view of climate action. Yeah. And I can tell you one thing: we've already seen in Europe, in the last European Parliament election, an important shift in public opinion when it comes to climate action. And I think this definitely has been influenced by the youth climate movement. Yeah. We have seen green parties that have scored very high results in the last election. Mm-hmm. We think also that those youth organizations, that have been mobilized, will come into the next electoral cycle, and they will vote in the next 2, 3, 4 years. Yeah. So it will be a powerful movement.
Yeah. And what's the right position for a policymaker? It seems to be a thin line between being too alarmist, but also wanting to raise awareness.
Yeah, I think yes. I mean, there's a need for a good balance between, on one hand, showing that there is a real urgency to act, and on the other hand, not trying to scare people off, because in fact you have to still deliver on a very ambitious action. So on the one hand, you still have to kind of look into ways of mitigating climate action. On the other hand, we've been seeing also, and I've been seeing in the United States, shift towards more attention being paid to questions of resilience, climate resilience, and adaptation. And indeed, I'm having this week a very important conversation workshop, which we are organizing here in Washington, D.C., on resilience and adaptation between the European Union, our EU institutions, and our EU member states, and U.S. Climate Alliance Secretariat based in Washington, D.C., but also we are expecting a lot of experts from across the U.S. Climate Alliance states. Yeah. As you know, 25 states are participants to this alliance, joining us in Washington, D.C. for this important conversation.
Very interesting. Does it include innovation too?
Absolutely.
And geoengineering, or not yet?
Not yet, because geoengineering is more what we consider as part of the mitigation, more kind of fighting, reducing the emissions. When we talk about resilience adaptation, we talk about kind of, how to make sure that infrastructure rollout and rebuilding activities are done in a manner that will help them withstand future climate impact.
Yeah. And has it become toxic to talk about fossil fuel at the level of the European Commission?
I don't think it has become toxic to talk about fossil fuels in Brussels, but I can tell you there has been a gradual shift. I've been observing a gradual shift over the last, in particular, 5 years, and I can give you an example of that work. Around 5 years ago, we kicked off also our work. It was in fact 2014. Our work on improving interconnectivity to infrastructure build-up in Europe when it comes to energy. Yeah. And in the very beginning of that period of time, I remember there was much more focus on gas interconnectivity. Of course, natural gas was important for Europe's energy security. It was the first pillar of the energy union, which we talked at the beginning of this episode. But throughout those 5 years, the shift has been gradual towards more electricity and smart grid projects. And today, for example, there are only around 30 projects on that famous projects of common interest list.
Yeah,
from that
which was released last week, right?
Yes, exactly. And so, even within the last 2 years, we issue this list every second year. You have seen a shrinkage of those projects, so between from 50 to actually 30. And right now, there's only 20% of all projects on this PCI list are actually natural gas.
Yeah.
So you can see that we've seen this gradual shift. Second example of that is that the European Parliament has been more and more calling on the European Commission to come up with ways of prioritizing more electricity and smart grid projects, and contrary to natural gas.
Yeah.
And I think the Commission is now more and more looking into green gas, hydrogen, ways of maybe utilizing the natural gas infrastructure in Europe for making it future-proof for those green gases.
Yeah. And can you pick one thing that works really well in the transatlantic energy and climate relation, and something that works less well or might need more improvement or is stalling?
Also last week it's so interesting because we are actually talking today, and last week there was so many important developments. Last week, in fact, we issued also a progress report on everything related to how the European Union is doing when it comes to achieving our different goals in both energy efficiency and so on. And so what we have seen is that when it comes to energy efficiency, even for our targets for 2020, we are not yet delivering as much as we actually would like to be delivering. And there's a number of reasons for that. Of course, our economy has in the last 4 or 5 years expanded, which is an extremely good thing. But we have to be better in, for example, renovating houses. We have to be better in making sure that the products we use are highly energy efficient. We have to be also better on transport emissions.
I think buildings is something that we see also in the US, like the lack of energy efficiency in buildings. And I think Bill Gates just released something on the topic last week also. I think I read about it. But like something on the transatlantic like issues and dialogue, is there something that you think is working really well right now and something that is not working at all?
I think what is really, really working well is definitely our conversation in the field of energy security. On energy security, in particular also energy security of our important allies and neighbors, EU neighbors such as Ukraine, Moldova, our discussion is extremely relevant. We've been doing some exercises together, working together with Ukraine on topics such as how the U.S. LNG or generally the LNG can be brought to Ukraine to improve Ukraine's resilience. These conversations are extremely relevant and I think well received and welcome in Ukraine and Moldova.
That's just a little bit surprising to me when we hear here in the US like the whole impeachment probe and how Ukraine is in the middle of the whole thing. But
yes, but I mean, these are the politics, and this is way beyond my pay grade to be able to comment on that. We, behind the kind of the politics of Ukraine and the impeachment, we've never had an area where Ukraine has always been an area where we've been extremely dynamic and taking things together forward, developing strategy, and actually, in fact, providing replies and responses to whatever needs there have been in Ukraine, including financial.
Yeah. So do you think we're going to see a deal to extend the long-term gas contract between Ukraine and Russia by the end of the year?
So that's definitely, I think, cannot be excluded that we get there, and we obviously hope very much that we get there. I can tell you one thing. I mean, the good thing is that we've been having constructive approaches and willingness to discuss in the trilateral format over this fall. You have seen that there's been two trilaterals at the level of ministers, including the CEOs of the gas companies, happening in Brussels over the last 2 months. That's a good thing. We have also seen an agreement on one important area there. We now have concluded that Ukraine gas transit is going to be subject to European law. So including unbundling, including tariff regulation, including transparency. These are important elements to note, and we see progress on them.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've seen less progress on an agreement when it comes to volumes and when it comes to kind of, the duration of a potential future contract. But I mean, we still have 2 months to go. We have an intensification of bilateral exchanges that is happening right now between Russia and Ukraine. We will have, trilateral format in senior official level over the next days and weeks. And Vice President Shevchevich is actually willing to have another trilateral within the next 2 weeks. So I think we are optimistic that, things are moving in the right direction.
Okay. Well, let's switch on this optimistic note to your personal and professional trajectory.
Okay.
So Dagmara, you're originally from Poland, and you studied law. You were a brilliant student, especially in German language, and that seems to have shaped your destiny in working with different languages and landing at the European Commission in Brussels and now in Washington, D.C. Can you tell us a little bit about your trajectory and what are the main takeaways that helped you?
Yeah, of course. Listen, I think when it comes to your personal trajectory, the first thing that really shapes you is your very personal family surrounding. And I was very lucky to be growing up in a family where my parents have been convinced about the importance of a profound and very good education, where education was number one priority, and they have been always trying to support me financially in order to be able to learn languages and study abroad. So when I said to my parents that I was actually thinking of studying in Germany back in 1999, they were not necessarily extremely happy because obviously they would like you to be closer to home in Warsaw. But they were saying we will support you whatever it takes. So with that support, obviously, I was extremely strong-armed in pursuing that path that I actually had in mind for myself. And I was also very lucky to choose a university which was very good, but at the same time, it had all the the necessary facilities to actually focus on the learning and educating. It wasn't very easy, honestly, to study in a foreign language. I mean, German back then was a completely foreign language.
Right.
So I remember when I was reading my first book for law, I took 1 hour to read one page. But I mean, these are things that shape you, that make you stronger, and that was an extremely gratifying experience for me to actually be able to make sure that I actually succeed in studying in Germany.
Yeah, and so now you have yourself 2 kids, and are you following the same example with languages and studying abroad? I mean, they're still young.
They're still young. They're 3 and 7. But honestly, we now have obviously also French as our common language in our household. We're trying to cultivate our French, Polish, some German still, because we have plenty of German friends and colleagues, and English. And that's obviously on top of the Spanish that is in the US, such an important language. That's already adds up to 5. So that's an interesting mix, honestly. But yeah, so we're trying to kind of cultivate it every day with books and literature, and with television, of course, but also first and foremost through social contact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those kids, multicultural, multilingual, they are so lucky. They don't really know it yet. But it's
Yes.
also like an intellectual gymnastic, right? To move from one language to another. And also it's much more than the language, it's the culture too, like to be able to understand different culture, which I think it's really enriching.
And this is why we're so lucky, honestly, as Europeans. We're so lucky as Europeans because we have this diversity in Europe. We have this cultural diversity, the diversity of the cuisine. We have, all different mentalities and attitudes. And honestly, I mean, living in Brussels is such an amazing experience. You are exposed to all those differences in one melting spot. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did Erasmus as I mean as a younger student in Spain, and it's the living experience of being a European, right? Is it still very popular?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we also have this students exchange, which is called Erasmus, which is extremely popular over the last years. But I think also traveling and tourism is expanding so much in Europe because obviously through the internal market and the liberalization efforts of the European institutions in particular, we've managed to actually make traveling throughout Europe so inexpensive. And people are taking advantage of it. And it's so great to have it, to have so many languages on the streets of all the capitals and also in the countryside. It's just such a success of the European integration,
Yeah. Well, it was great to have you, Dagmara. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts. Good. We'll have you soon back. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Have a great one.
Bye.
Bye.
That concludes our Energy Vista episode, which was recorded on November 4, 2019. This is Leslie Palti-Guzman saying good day and good luck.